Nostalgia can be a pretty powerful thing. It can warp and distort your memories of the past, causing you to view them in a brighter light. Everybody experiences nostalgia in one way or another. It could be a rainy day that sparks a nostalgic feeling for when you were a child playing in the rain. It could be a certain smell or a song that you hear that takes you back to a time that you remember fondly. Video games can provide heaps of nostalgia. Hearing this sound always brings me back to my childhood. Just the same, hearing this music brings back waves of nostalgic feelings. Destiny 1 and the journey throughout its 3 years are full of great memories and moments that I will never forget. From pulling the Ethernet cable out on Crota, loot cave farming, or using Galahorn to burn strike bosses, there are countless nostalgic feelings this game will bring. But beyond moments like those, is my love for Destiny 1 just nostalgia? Or does Destiny 1 truly offer some things better than Destiny 2? If you follow this channel, then you know it's no secret that I prefer Destiny 1 over Destiny 2, and today I'd like to go over exactly why that is. I'm not saying Destiny 2 does everything worse. In fact, there are a ton of quality of life improvements available in Destiny 2 right now that I wish Destiny 1 had. Some of the content in Destiny 2 is also incredible, like the dungeons and most of the raids. But for whatever reason, I find it hard to keep playing Destiny 2 shortly after a new content drop. An expansion can keep me around for maybe a month, and a new season, maybe a week. And I find it hard to get invested into Destiny 2's endgame when power levels increase so frequently, and the power grind is identical every season and expansion. The loot pool is also so oversaturated that every single drop feels meaningless and essentially the same. After going back and leveling a brand new account for Destiny 1, I've really rediscovered what I loved about the endgame of Destiny 1 compared to Destiny 2. And it isn't just nostalgia talking that keeps me playing Destiny 1 almost daily again. There has to be more to it. And after 90 hours on this new account, I've come to the conclusion that Destiny 1's endgame was more rewarding. And I don't mean more rewarding in terms of excess loot dumped on my lap with hundreds of weapons showering down. No. I mean less frequency of drops, less weapons overall in the loot pool, and more meaningful ways to obtain those weapons so that when you finally do get a drop, it feels special. Destiny 1 weapons and armor were rare, legendary engrams were rare, legendary drops from raids and strike chests are also rare, especially if you're chasing specific roles. You weren't rewarded for every minuscule effort you put in. Some people didn't like that and prefer the overshowering of loot for any slight bit of effort, and maybe that's just the gaming landscape today. So many games have turned into looter-shooter-esque games that constantly drop loot every 3 minutes, and maybe it was inevitable for Destiny to become more and more generous with its showering of loot. But I think when loot isn't so plentiful, it makes it more meaningful to get. In Destiny 2, a great example of this would be the 1,000 Voices chase. If that weapon were tied to a quest or was a guaranteed drop after a completion, it wouldn't have that prestigious element to it and give it that moment of relief feeling of, I finally got my 1,000 voices on my 26th or my 50th clear. The chase for rare loot like this is what I love most about Destiny, and Destiny 1 is full of so many 1,000 voices type chases. Sure, there are some exotic quests and simple sources of loot, and many of those streamlined loot guarantees were introduced in the Rise of Iron, like the Kvostov quest, the Galahorn quest, and the Abaddon and Nova Mortis quest. These were when Bungie started introducing easy mode access to exotics. But there are still plenty of hard to get exotics to work towards week after week in the game. And not just exotics, but legendaries. Legendaries in the form of strike-specific weapons and armor pieces that were farmable for god rolls. Weapons and armor packages from the Crucible, Vanguard, and your choice of faction. Legendaries from the raid that were actually good instead of Destiny 2 where raid weapons are just mediocre. And of course, a rare legendary engram that can sometimes surprise you with a fantastic roll. And each of these legendaries and exotics are still so rare to come by in the current Destiny 1 game. Sometimes you spend a few hours chasing certain exotics or strike weapons with good rolls and come up short-handed. And that was okay to me because it gave me reason to come back the next day. One argument that I hear so much about why Destiny 2 is better is, remember the content droughts of D1? And my answer to that is yes, I do remember the content droughts, and sometimes it was tough, but I ultimately prefer them to the constant drip feeding of mediocre content. And I really think this is one of the weakest arguments for why Destiny 2 is better, because it still is completely subjective to the type of player that you are. Personally, I liked the sense of ending to a piece of content. Like when a new expansion came out and all the content came out at once. You played through it, farmed the new raid, strikes, and other endgame for a little bit, and then said, alright, I'm waiting for the next expansion. And it could be months before you decided to put the game down and wait for the next expansion. You had a geared out character, you still ran a raid or two every week, but you felt accomplished because you'd done everything the new content could offer. And I gotta ask, what was so wrong with that? Why do people feel like they need a new exotic quest every single week? A new drip feed piece of content every few days? Is that really what you guys like? Never feeling like you're caught up or have any room to breathe? I preferred to look forward to a new piece of content or expansion for Destiny rather than having one expansion drip fed throughout the entire year. It makes it feel like I've gotten a cheapened experience, like Bungie is only letting me play the game at the pace they want me to, instead of letting me play to my heart's content and be happy I finally completed the content. After completing the content, it made me anxiously await the next expansion. And like I said, it could be months or almost the entire year that you're playing the new expansion, whenever you feel like you've completed the expansion. And these moments of downtime really gave a chance for the community-driven fun to shine, like Husky Raid type content, simply exploring a planet and glitching out of the map, or people forming fire teams for competitive sweats in the Crucible. Things like that don't exist in Destiny 2 because instead we get a go kill 500 enemies quest every single week. Another factor that leads to never feeling caught up is the power grind that resets every 3 months and ultimately feels pointless. You can never feel caught up on the power grind because it just never ends. An arbitrary number that is the sole focus of every single season. How off-putting was it to realize that you had to grind power for what felt like forever to even access the new Prophecy dungeon this season? I get that Destiny is a live game, but can we tone down the drip feed content, the power grinding, and the sense of never being able to catch up? The exact opposite is what keeps me playing Destiny 1. I've been in the 390s for over a month now, just shy of the max of 400, but the 400 power grind isn't what keeps me returning every week in that game. It's using a Crucible booster to run Crucible for a few hours with hopes of an Ias Luna dropping, and then opening a few reputation packages back at the tower. It's farming strikes for skeleton keys to open the Omnigul chest and praying for a god-rolled Grasp of Malik. It's hopping into a raid with hopes of getting an Adept Fatebringer, Vex Mythoclast, Ex Machina, or some other great rolled armor pieces that also look so badass. At this point, I'm not even worried about ever hitting 400 because the rest of the endgame is engaging enough and the loot, while rare, is still worth chasing. One thing I really love is the passive progression in Destiny 1. Running strikes, Crucible, and doing bounties all work towards not only your Crucible and Vanguard ranks, but also your faction. Rank up packages for these vendors were such a simple and grindable endgame progression that is missing in Destiny 2. It rewarded those who farmed activities for rank up packages that held rare ships, shaders, and potential god-rolled weapons and armor. The fact that these rank ups were passive was great, but if you wanted to get 2 of your friends to speedrun heroic strikes with a Vanguard booster, then you could, and you could go in there and get a lot of loot by the end. I just really think that these rank up packages through your Vanguard, Crucible, and faction were an excellent extension of the endgame. Destiny 1, in my opinion, is a tougher game and feels better because of that. Killing a strike boss feels more rewarding in Destiny 1 because it usually was a harder fought battle. Nightfall or heroic strikes were a real challenge at times. Enemies hit harder and you had to be a little bit more strategic with your plays and your builds. In Destiny 2, you can just breeze through about any PvE activity, including the raids. Enemies are rarely a threat in raids, more like just trash to clear. But in Destiny 1 raids, you can still screw yourselves if you let your guard down for just a little too long and get overwhelmed by ads. You had to be on your toes in most situations because even a seasoned veteran with a perfect loadout could be killed. I find Destiny 2 raids, while some harder mechanically, much easier to survive and coast through if you already know the mechanics. Despite killing Axis in Destiny 1 over 40 times, I still always feel that sense of accomplishment of killing a tough boss every single time. Now this may be an unpopular opinion, but I prefer Destiny 1 PvP. It's slower paced, like Halo, but not too slow that it's boring. It's not as Twitch shooter feeling as D2 and feels like you have a little bit more time to strategize. I also prefer the Destiny 1 maps to those in D2, and I think Bungie overall agrees because they ended up adding almost all of them to Destiny 2 by now. The only thing that still angers me about Destiny 1's PvP is the ammo economy change Bungie made right before they released Destiny 2. If Bungie had never made the special ammo economy change in the final patch, then I'd praise this PvP even more. But even with these changes, I still prefer the Destiny 1 PvP experience over Destiny 2. There's so many small things that I preferred in Destiny 1 as well, like customizable classes, stronger primaries, separate social spaces, the lore, the weapon and armor designs, the engram system, the build crafting, Xur's economy, just to name a few. The game ultimately does a better job at keeping me invested week after week. In a nutshell, here's what I really prefer the most about this game over Destiny 2. I prefer the endgame gameplay loops and progression focused on rare loot instead of power level. I prefer the difficulty of PvE content in Destiny 1. I prefer the focus on core activities and the meaningful loot found inside them. This means raids, strikes, and Crucible. I much prefer the slower paced PvP experience in Destiny 1. And I really do love the deep lore of Destiny 1. I think the storytelling and the lore was a lot stronger back in Destiny 1. And here's what I dislike primarily about Destiny 2. I dislike the constant drip feed and power grind, the oversaturated loot pool and overshowering of loot, the sense of never feeling caught up, and the easy PvE side of the game. These are just my opinions, feel free to disagree, and I'm sure many of you will, and that's fine. I just find myself still hooked on the Destiny 1 endgame and can't be bothered with Destiny 2's in its current state. Thank you so much for watching, I will see you all next time.